Welcome and good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Fletcher. I'm Vice President of Public Safety Solutions at 911 Inform. I want to thank everybody who's joining us here today. And first of all, I want to thank all of my other panelists that have taken time out of their busy schedules. We're not talking about product. This is not a sales pitch. We're talking about compliance, and we're talking about Kari's Law, RAY BAUM'S Act, and what businesses need to do, how to become compliant. And we're going to be talking to some folks in the industry that are going to let us see what happens from their side of the situation, and kind of get a better view of that. So first of all, let's start off with our analyst from Metrigy, Irwin Lazar. Irwin, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Mark, it's great to be here. Irwin Lazar, President and Principal Analyst with a company called Metrigy, and we spend our time gathering data from end user organizations, trying to understand what they're doing and why. So I cover the unified communications collaboration space. I've had the opportunity of working with you and Martha many years on Enterprise Connect on our annual E911 panel, and very excited to share our insights.
And then joining us from upstate in the Buffalo region, our resident tennis star, Martha Beyer, who has helped us with Kari's Law from the very get-go.
Well, it is an honor and a privilege to be here. As Fletch and Irwin said, we've worked together for a number of years, providing what may be the most entertaining, if not informative, session at Enterprise Connect. I have been working with Fletch on these issues for a long time. I'm committed to this issue. I get the opportunity to write about it fairly often, and I'm very happy to be here and help where I can.
Next, we're going to bring up Tracy Eldridge, who is traveling constantly. This woman travels 24 hours a day, and she was not able to join us, so I was able to capture her in living color prior to her last departure. So let me just bring her up here, and I'll introduce you to Ms. Tracy Eldridge, ENP.
Hi, my name is Tracy Eldridge. I am an NENA emergency number professional, an ENP, with a passion for educating and training telecommunicators so they have the ability to save lives on both sides of the call. So what does that mean? My company, On Scene First, trains telecommunicators on technology, liability issues, educational issues on how to do their job without complacency, as well as leadership education for administration and mental health and wellness for the telecommunicators. Thank you for having me, Fletch.
And one of her recent students, or encouraged student actually, who's someone who's taking their ENP exam. So you're almost I'm going to call you the star today, because you're the one who smacked your fist on the desk and started taking action on this. And Shanna Brussell from Nelson County 911. Tell us who you are, what you're, where you're from, and what you do.
Hello, I am Shanna Brussell. I'm with Nelson County E911 Center here in Nelson County, Kentucky. Just have to excuse me because this is my first webinar and words are hard. So I have been on the 911 side for going on almost 10 years now.
Great. And so what did you do from a program perspective down in your center? Tell me the story about how all of this came about into your center.
So it all came about when I was actually in Tracy's study group and listening to Kari's Law and RAY BAUM'S Act and the issues that we have with MLTSs. And I was like, and then I was listening to different webinars that Fletch had done and Tracy had done and Hank Hunt had done. And I was like, this can't happen again. And what can we do here in Nelson County to make sure that people are in compliance? I mean, it's taken some work, but if just one life is saved, then it's totally worth it.
No, that's great. And, it's something that we've been up on the industry side. We've been trying to promote for years around good practice and so forth. And Irwin, give me a little just snapshot of what you've seen and the evolution that you've seen over the past, 5-6 years that you've been deeply, deeply involved.
No, I think the biggest evolution has been on the enterprise side, the user side of things. So we went from an environment where everybody had fixed telephones, and we just worried about how to make sure we could track those when they were moved to an environment now where people are using all sorts of different devices, soft phones, working from home, splitting time between office and home. So the complexity has changed, and I think coupling that with the regulatory environment becoming much stricter here in the US and actually having federal regulations now over the last few years has caused organizations to take a more serious look at 911 and try and understand, are we compliant? And I think the crux of a lot of what we've been discussing has been, what does that mean to be compliant? So it's become a more frequent conversation among the folks that we talk to in our research.
And I think if you look back at the past webinars over the past 5 years, it's migrated from a technology discussion and the what can be done and the art of the possible and what it is to track and manage operationally all of this. And it wasn't really until Kari's law came out and really until the federal legislation was kind of, my favorite word, promulgated and put on the books. I'd like to see I've never actually seen the books. Do the books actually exist, Martha? But it's there and it's causing a bit of a stir. So, what do you have to say about, the impact that the legislation has had?
So I would say the impact of the legislation more than anything else, although Shanna's point is very well made. The existence of regulation has raised the profile of the issue, and for maybe not the first time, but to a much greater extent, people are actually talking about these issues, thinking about them, and recognizing that liability goes not just to the operator of the MLTS, but to the team that installs it, that sells it, that leases it. And in typical courtroom fashion, although there has not been a case that I'm aware of yet that has been filed, basic lawyering 101 is that you throw the lawsuit at everybody and see what sticks. So there's a ton of liability to go around, and that certainly has gotten people's attention, particularly because this is a matter of life and death. And as I have learned from Fletch, a first responder has 4 minutes to get to someone. That is not very much time. And I don't think anybody wants to be on the hook for dropping the ball in this regard, when in most cases the technological upgrades that are required are relatively simple. Not always, certainly, but mostly.
I think it's fair to say that the bulk of the upgrades are fairly simple, and it's a quote unquote flip of the switch. And yes, you do have complex environments that require a lot of stuff to happen and a lot of management to get right under the really, really complex. But those are really few and far between. Shanna, you just had a school system that you ran across the other day that had a compliance problem, right? I mean, what's the story around that?
So I haven't heard the full story, except for when they went to go test, and there was 2 different schools in that school system. It went to another 911 center. Now, they didn't tell me which one that was, but they immediately started working on it. Their school resource officer was actually the one who made the second call, and he was like, all right, it went here, I'm on it. It was later in the day, school was pretty much closed, but he was like, tomorrow morning, promise you I'm on it. And I talked to him yesterday. They've already got it fixed, and they tested sometime last week when I was going to the emergency services conference. So they are up and going, but I mean, that could have affected hundreds, if not thousands of students, that their call system went somewhere else. And that's not okay.
No, it's not okay. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. There's a lot of people just kind of ignore the problem, or they're not aware of the problem, and it literally festers. And when you find it as a problem, it's usually as the last sentence in the bottom of a headline story. And by then it's just far, far too late. So, that's what this is about the awareness and about the compliance levels, because, you're looking at a couple of federal laws, and, certainly the FCC or the Department of Justice and all these people that we talk about, they don't have the staff to run around and police all of the enterprises in schools, if you will. So I think it's important that the public safety answer points, the ECCs, are taking the high road and going out and reaching out, and starting with their school community and saying, hey, let's do some testing. Let's understand. Let's make sure you guys have a plan. And, we will help you do that. Now, Shanna, you've got a relatively small county in Kentucky, under 50,000 people.
Right.
It's not impossible for you to orchestrate that test, right? And how many
Right.
letters have you sent out?
I've sent out 100 so far, and I would say that we've probably gotten a response from about 50.
Okay. And for the most part, what would you say the percentage is that, I was compliant, I wasn't, but I'm getting it fixed. And then I know you ran into a small sliver that said, you can't tell me what to do.
Right. So I would say that out of the people who tested, 75% of the people were in compliance, and a lot of them didn't even know that they were. They're like, we haven't done an upgrade since we bought this establishment in 2016. But when they tested, they were getting everything they needed. It came directly to us. They had the on-site notification, no non needed, and they knew exactly where that call was coming from inside of that facility. So, that was education on their part, because they had no clue that any of this stuff even existed for them.
That's great. And that's a really positive stat to hear, because it says that what Martha and Irwin and myself have been literally, doing the old Kreshnev banging the shoe on the table about this for years, that we never get an indication if this is actually sinking in. And when we do, we get, I can go to someplace else and they'll tell me, well, nobody was compliant. And then I'll get you that says 75%, which, wow, that's a really, really positive number. So out of the ones that weren't compliant, what are those few outliers that were just giving you grief over, you can't tell me what to do? Because I know you ran into a few of those.
It was just two that have given us that type of issue so far. And, what we're doing here is we're trying to help them, help their customers, help their staff, their guests, whatever their establishment is, be safe before the issue comes up. And, we made it very clear in the letter that we sent out, was like, just make the test call, then you can make the issues, or then you can try to resolve the issues. However, if you do not test with us and we have a problem, we're reporting you. And we reached out to a certain establishment here in our county multiple times. They have our admin numbers blocked, and that's been probably going on a year now. And their response was, well, our phone system is we just can't make any more updates to it. Then get a new one. I mean, I'm not the one in charge of the budget for their establishment, but it's not okay. So their response to us getting false 911 calls was to unplug the person's phone that was making the 911 calls. Instead of trying to fix their system, they would rather just not allow someone to call 911 at all. Like, that can't happen.
Martha, I see the steam coming out of your ears.
Well, okay. So a couple things. Again, Shauna's right on the money, but Kari's Law and RAY BAUM'S Act have some exceptions, and they do not apply for older systems. So in that regard, I mean, I'm not a big fan of this, but they're not under the same legal obligation that someone is who's put in a new system. On the other hand, in the event that there is a trial, the first question that's going to come up is, were you aware of this? Were you aware that the change was relatively minor? And how reasonable was it that you chose not to do this at a relatively insignificant cost? I'm not saying it's totally insignificant, but if in fact the changes to accommodate these two bits of federal regulation could be accommodated or could be deployed with ease, it's a bad argument to say, well, we didn't have to do it, so we didn't.
Yeah. Irwin, what are you hearing back from the business side when this comes up? Because I'm sure as you get engaged with companies large and small, this is a discussion point that happens.
Yeah, I think a lack of clarity in terms of what does it mean to be compliant, like we talked about earlier, where, to Martha's point, the older systems need to be compliant. What is it? What counts as an older system? who's responsible for writing the check for whatever changes need to be made compliant, a lack of awareness, I would say, under risk management legal groups within larger companies that don't really think about 911 compliance. And then the belief that, well, my provider will just take care of it. Well, if I'm using a cloud communications provider, that should be all I need to do. So I think people don't, in many cases, have a comprehensive strategy. To the point earlier about you, Shanna mentioned 75% compliance. That's awesome. What we heard in our research, we went out to about 400 companies back in the early part of 21, and only about 57% said that they thought they were compliant. The rest expected to be compliant for the most part by the end of 21. But again, when you delve into what does it mean to be compliant, that's where you start getting a lot of lack of clarity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other part of it, that's always been there as kind of the hanging chat, if you will, behind the scenes is, well, who's going to find out if I'm compliant? And how is somebody going to know if I'm compliant? And, just discussing the issue with Tracy Eldridge, who was a dispatcher up in upstate New York for 20 years. She had a couple of incidents in her center when she was there that kind of tuned her into the whole Kari's Law thing, which actually led to her and I meeting at a NENA conference up in New York. So I'm gonna bring Tracy on again. She was unable to be here live today, but her and I talked about discrepancy reports, something that's actually been part of the NENA standard, but isn't followed as often as you would think.
This has become one of my passion projects. Back in 2015, in my center, we had a situation where we had a structure fire in a facility called Zero Waste. And when the caller picked up the phone at the facility to call 911, that call went to another jurisdiction, New Bedford, where their host facility was. And knowing what I knew about our system in Massachusetts, I made my telecommunicator fill out a discrepancy report to be filed with our state 911 system, and got the ball rolling to get that problem resolved. It didn't get resolved. So 6 months later, we received another call from that same facility for a gentleman that fell and was impaled by rebar. And I knew immediately that the call went to New Bedford again and was rerouted back to us, filled out another discrepancy report, and then went through the motions to contact the facility in New Bedford to share with them the importance of, getting this situation resolved. But it started with the discrepancy report. And I think many folks have heard me speak on this. You've heard me speak on this. This is how I found out about Kari's Law, because I wanted to know if there was a place that I had recourse to hold their feet to the fire to fix this issue. And as I started learning about Kari's Law and implementing things in my center that we were following up and getting these things resolved, as I started teaching telecommunicators about Kari's Law and RAY BAUM'S Act, and I referred to the calls that were being rerouted as part of Kari's Law, like you're not direct transfer that call, right, as part of Kari's Law. And what had happened was, as I was talking about discrepancy reporting, that if a call comes to you from somewhere else, if it comes from Northern 911 in Canada, if it comes from an Intrado call center, if it comes from another agency, and it's your call that went somewhere else, that's a red flag, and a discrepancy report needs to be filled out. And the reason why I started this passion project to get folks to truly understand everything there is to know about discrepancy reports is because when I would say those words, folks would look at me like I had lobsters coming out of my ears. They didn't know what I meant by discrepancy reports, and I realized there was an issue there.
So Tracy, let me ask you, the discrepancy reporting in Massachusetts, you've got a very, very proactive state board on 911, and they kind of took the discrepancy report beyond its original purpose, which was to get the database fixed, and they used it from a compliance perspective as well. What is Massachusetts doing there?
Well, speaking of Massachusetts, I'll use our appropriate term. I was wicked excited to hear that our state was, I believe, one of the front runners in helping maintain a compliance database when it comes to folks not being in compliance with Kari's Law and Ray Baum'S Act. For years, Massachusetts had a very thorough MLTS legislation. It encompassed what Kari's Law encompassed, but it also went a little bit above and beyond. And just as of recently, they have created a compliance list. So when that telecommunicator creates the discrepancy report, it goes to a designee in your team, in your department, whoever is responsible. It could be the director, it could be the deputy director, it could be quality assurance, whoever is designated as that person. They get that discrepancy form, and now they need to determine who has to take on the challenge of finding out what the problem is and why the problem happened. In Massachusetts, our discrepancy reports, for the most part, would go to the state 911 department. What the state 911 department realized is that there were folks that were in violation of Kari's Law and Ray Baum'S Act, and they weren't compliant. So they took it upon themselves to create the initiative that they're going to continue to keep a database. They're going to monitor publicly who is moving through getting these situations resolved and who is not. And I don't think anybody wants to be on a public list that says you're not compliant with a federal law that says you are supposed to be doing these, especially if a 911 call has to get placed. Too much liability there. So kudos to Massachusetts.
So what are you finding from your various interactions? You're constantly on the road training PSAPs. What's the reaction that you get from the actual ECCs? Is this more work for them? Is it worthwhile? What's the general feeling that you're getting there? Because a lot of people will say, no one's going to pay attention to this.
Well, from a liability standpoint, I make it very clear in many of my presentations. I first start off talking about the makings of a lawsuit. And I tell folks, don't be afraid of being sued, be afraid of successfully being sued. And I want to explain to folks the importance of, as a baby dispatcher, we were all taught that we are responsible as a call taker to verify Annie and Allie information, right? And if there's a problem, somebody needs to be notified. And some agencies, their notification system includes sending an email to the director or a designee. Most 911 systems have the ability to fill out a report, an Annie Allie report, discrepancy report, where it just automatically backfills that information into a printable document. Every center is different. Every system is different, how they can do that. We talk about it a lot, but what I'm seeing generally is once I put the ball in their courts, there are folks that are running with it, just like our good friend Shanna. They're running with it saying, you know what? We have not done our due diligence here and we have to do better. There are folks that are like, oh, that's good information to know. We're getting by. We're doing the basics. But really the goal has to be is to get a policy and procedure in place, tell the telecommunicators what they need to be looking for, what they need to be verifying, what they need to be reporting to the designee. And then that designee needs to figure out who is responsible for holding this flaming bag of you know what. If it's a discrepancy such as, and I'll use an example in Baldwin County. Baldwin County, Alabama shared a discrepancy report with me, and it was for a resort type facility. Now, let's just say that it was called Sunshine Acres. When the 911 call came into their 911 center, the name of the facility, it just said pool. It didn't say Sunshine Acres. Therefore, there's a discrepancy there. Pool is not the name of the facility, and somebody has to have that fixed. So the designee would then take that information and speak to the folks at the facility and say, you need to get this changed in your phone system. It's super important that we have systems in place that our telecommunicators are aware of what they're supposed to be looking at and what they're supposed to be reporting. And that all starts with the education of the person who's going to be that designee. And some folks are being really receptive and blown away with the fact that they didn't realize that this was part of their responsibility. And other folks are still kind of being a little bit complacent. And I think by us doing these types of things, we're getting folks to really embrace the fact that they shouldn't be complacent about this anymore. It could cost somebody their life.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And listen, as a personal friend of mine and my designated sister, as we talk all the time, I really appreciate you taking the time today, Trace. Thanks for all you do in this industry. And I know you've got to run. You've got a very, very busy schedule. So get out there and get everybody trained up on discrepancy reports, and let's make this a safer world for everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care. Shanna, obviously, you were very impacted by Tracy's presentation of this information. What what happened in your center with Sean around that?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What happened with your director, Sean? I mean, did you get support from him immediately?
Oh, absolutely. He has been great about anything that is going to positively affect our center and our citizens and our responders. He 100% supports us. Now, he didn't like having to sign all 100 letters, but I'm going to do it anyway. But yeah, he's been great. As soon as I came to him and was like, listen, I've learned about this. What can we do? Like, this is my idea. Can we make this happen? And he was like, absolutely. And then that's when I got a hold of you and Tracy and started harassing you all about it.
Yeah. Now, it was interesting. So you were actually out at a conference when a lot of this came up, and you had called 911 and 911 from the hotel that you were in.
Yes.
Tell us real briefly what happened there.
So I was just starting to learn about everything with RAY BAUM'S Act and Kari's Law. And I'm staying at this hotel for this class that I'm in. And I looked down and it says, dial 911. So I was like, So I just tried dialing 911 just to see what's going to happen. You know, not being a 911 dispatcher, I know not to hang up. Like, I know better. So, but nothing happened when I dialed 911. Like the instructions said, nothing happened at all.
Just a blank phone line.
Yes. And so I hung up, and immediately that PSAP called me back and was like, did you just dial 911? And I was like, oh my goodness, let me explain who I am and what I'm doing. And then as soon as I hung up with them, the phone rang again. And this is all the hotel phone. And it was the front desk. And they said, and we just saw that you called 911. Is everything okay? And I'm like, yes, I'll be up there in a minute. I'll explain to you what I'm doing. And at this point, I just knew that my boss was going to call me and send me home. Like, what the hell are you doing? You're over here in this town. You're supposed to be representing us, and you're making false 911 calls. So then, just like 2 minutes later, my cell phone rings, and I thought, oh my gosh, here it is. And they say, come home, you're fired. It ended up being someone else. But so I went up and talked to the front desk right after that, and just explained. And I was like, so what is it that you see? Like, explain this to me. And she, which of course they had already dismissed the alert and all that stuff, but she was like, oh, it pops up on her screen. There's an alarm going off. It shows me what room number it has called. It's like, that's good. Like, this is what I was doing. I was testing to see if y'all were, in compliance, and congratulations, you are, which that really didn't mean anything to her, but congratulations, you are. Thought for sure I was going to get fired.
But again, the important part there is they had not tested their 911 or had done anything to ensure. And we believe they had switched over to voice over IP trunking and disconnected or moved their old physical phone lines onto that new circuit, never thought about making changes in the PBX to accommodate that line change. And you were basically getting connected to a disconnected phone line.
Yes.
And, I mean, that's what we're assuming had happened. But
somehow the PSAP still knew that I had called. So,
which is probably the most interesting part about that. I'm not going to sit and troubleshoot that one. But again, so things were working, or they were provisioned somehow, but they weren't actually working. So this goes beyond being compliant. The hotel was compliant as far as they knew, but again, this goes towards, testing. What do we do to test? And again, that's kind of a double-edged sword because we can't be overloading the PSAPs with
Right.
all of these tests. But I think that something we all have learned over the years, there are mechanisms in the carrier networks that just about all of them are doing now that allow you to test and basically through an audio get an anti-alley readback without ringing the call through to the PSAP. Irwin, you probably see it more than anybody else, but that's pretty much a common feature across most platforms now, right?
Yeah, depends on the carrier and the provider, but being able to use, I think it's 933 for testing
933.
is pretty common these days. I think the bigger issue is, not having a test plan in place where you are going out and doing regular testing and then not coordinating with your local emergency call center to understand what kind of information they need. So that's all part of the testing process versus just, can the phone reach an operator?
Right. And that's really where, the compliance solution side comes into place here. And we're not talking about a piece of software. We're not talking about a piece of hardware. We're not talking about anything that's really of any expense. It's have a game plan in place. Know that a 911 call happens. When it does happen, this is the action that's going to be followed, and involve your local public safety agency. What do you need? What do y'all want to do? I threw a y'all in there for you, dear. Or is it all y'all? I want to be correct.
It's definitely y'all.
Okay.
Y'all.
So have you had companies ask you for a plan, or have you offered a plan? What advice are you giving them, or are they just getting the dialing fixed and going on with their lives?
So I tell them to reach back to their phone service provider. That's not my specialty, but I tell them, when they have to dial at 911, that everything I know about it is just a simple flip of a switch. Like, call them and get them to put you on the right path. And then, like, I also tell them that, if they're selling you, leasing you, all this stuff that's not in compliance since this date, if they're non-compliant. I just ran into that issue yesterday. Actually, I had a phone system installed here in the county sometime late last year, and this person was having to dial 911 to get out.
Two nines and a 911.
Yeah.
And that's on your county system.
Mm-hmm. So
you probably had a nice chat with them.
Oh, yeah. But almost everyone has been great and receptive, and what can we do to make this work?
Sure.
It's really good.
So I don't want to name any names or any specific incidences, obviously, but you guys had to actually go out to a meeting with somebody the other week, because I know your director called me.
Yes. So we did. And actually the part that we met with, like, it's a big campus, but they're all separate. So the part that we met with doesn't actually have an MLTS. So we talked to them about other issues, but then they got me in contact with the correct people for the other side of the campus who does. So and they tested.
They're kind of like a tenant then on the campus.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So Martha, where would a situation of that lie? You're a tenant in somebody else's building. Do you, as the tenant, have responsibility in there somewhere? Or is it the provider?
It's my favorite answer, which is it depends. It depends. It depends whose, and I use this term lightly, but whose phone system it is. That is, are you getting dial tone along with water? Is it a utility that's part of what you're paying as your rent package, or are you providing your own system? And either way, again, if there's an issue where someone's going to get sued, everybody's going to get sued, and they'll leave it up to the court to see which ones stick. So it's a fair assumption to say that everybody's on the hook. Let me just go back to one thing that you said a couple minutes ago about testing and meeting with your local first responders. This is a good idea anyway, to do it on a regular basis, because these are the people who are coming to your facility when you need them most and when time is most of the essence. Not to mention the fact it's not a bad idea to know who they are and for them to know who you are. So I always recommend to people an annual sit down with police, fire, ambulance. Just make sure you provide the right information. Fletch, you used to give the wonderful example for in terms of dispatchable location about cube identification, for example, and on a floor plan.
231.
Yeah, and that may be very useful to the architect. That may be very useful to maintenance people, but that is not useful to public safety because they don't know what the code is. And so sitting down with them and having an honest, open, relaxing conversation about what information is most useful to them not only makes a lot of sense, but it also goes a long way to suggesting that the entity that's operating the MLTS has behaved in a reasonable manner. And reasonable is a legal term of art. And that it's just a good idea all the way around. There's no reason not to do it and every reason to do it.
No, that's absolutely true. And I think a lot of people don't realize that because they're looking at the situation with beer goggles from their side. Well, I know where Cube 2C231 is. It's right next to the cafeteria by the men's bathroom. Shanna has never been into the building. The first responder has never been in the building. And, you know, they have no idea what that means. When you look at your information that's coming in, Shanna, what are you generally seeing for the additional line 2 data? Do you see specific data like a room number that's maybe useful or maybe not? Or, you know, do you look for doorways? What do you tell people to put in those records?
If it's a school, we definitely want to put in their classrooms because their classroom numbers, we don't, not to be rude, but we don't care that it's Miss Teresa's classroom because Miss Teresa next year might be 4 halls over. So we need to know the classroom number. And then it actually backs up to our FastPass system and all that stuff that we have implemented here in Nelson County. But mainly we're only seeing that second line of additional data on the school systems. And that's not all of them, just some of them.
So you brought up something, and this was the first time I heard of this when you and I were speaking 3 weeks ago, and you just brought it up again. It's called FastPass, and it's a system that you use in Nelson County, and actually the state of Kentucky has deployed it across the state, and now checking around, they use it in my own hometown here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I never knew that's what it was, but I'd always commented on my daughter's elementary school when she was in there, drive her to school in the morning, and every room from the outside would have an orange card in the window with a number on it. And there was another, you know, placard above the doors. And it wasn't until I talked to you 3 weeks ago that I realized, oh my God, that's the FastPass system. That FastPass system. And I called up somebody in my municipality and they're like, of course that's what it is. What are you, stupid? And I'm like, I didn't know. So explain to me what that is, because I think that's something that it's a policy that businesses could very easily adopt.
So the purpose of it is that when a 911 call is initiated from inside of the school, that we can ask specific questions like what room number. Again, don't tell me it's Miss Teresa's room because that doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't mean to anybody. Doesn't mean anything to anybody who did not go to school there when Miss Teresa taught. So every school is numbered the same, no matter how it's laid out. It all goes counterclockwise, and our responders are all trained to respond a certain way into that school. Each school has, or each hallway has a number. Each classroom, any room that you can physically go into has a number, including bathrooms and all that stuff. So when someone calls 911 and they're in Miss Teresa's classroom and they tell me that they are in, that's room 122, I quickly look on my map and I say, okay, send someone to this door 3, because that's the easiest and quickest access for my first responders to get in there. Now, depending on the situation, I mean, if it's an active shooter type thing, we are, they're going to go in whatever door they get to first. However, if it's a simple medical issue or a fight or something like that, we're going to get them into the quickest door possible.
So what it is specific location information internal to the school, but it's referenceable to you on a floor plan and a chart. And every dispatcher's got that book, or you have it on CAD digitally, where you can virtually or physically flip the book open and here's where I'm going.
Yeah.
That's a good system. So,
and all of our responders are taught on it. So
again, and simple processes. The school's numbered the same way, counterclockwise. These are the entrances that you should go into unless there's reason not to. Boy, that sounds like a simple rule to learn.
right. I just got to get them there. They got to figure out which way is clockwise and counterclockwise.
Well, yeah. Do we teach clockwise on a digital watch anymore? Irwin, you look like you had a comment there.
No, I just I really like the idea of having those standards. Again, if everybody knows what to expect, regardless of what building they're visiting, that's going to hopefully improve responsiveness.
So, as a person that guides enterprises in these plans, has today changed your thinking on things a little bit?
I don't know if today's changed. I mean, I think it's just sort of reiterating a lot of the issues that we've seen and we've talked about, above and beyond. This isn't an issue of cost and compliance. It's an issue of public safety and employee safety and well-being. And, again, I love, again, what Shanna said at the start of the call. If we're saving one life, we're doing something right. As we've always, talked in our session at Enterprise Connect, this is the only topic in enterprise communications where it's a life and death issue. You have to get this right. So if you're making decisions based on, well, I really don't want to spend the money, or I think I'm good to go, I'm just not going to worry about it. There's some serious consequences with not having a proactive strategy.
And it's a shame that even in my days back in Nortel, we had actually looked at potential insurance discounts that customers could potentially get if they had a system in place. And because there was no statistics on MLTS lives saved, they said, no, an actuary doesn't have anything to calculate what a savings could or should be. So probably the toughest question I'm going to ask you all day, Shanna, this has obviously been happening for years. What was it, just the awareness that decided, hey, I need to raise my hand here?
It was for me. I mean, until I started studying for my ENP, I honestly did not know about Kari's Law, RAY BAUM'S Act, didn't know about discrepancy forms. I think that the education for 911, even though it's getting better, but the state mandated education is typically free for all the centers, they're not teaching this kind of stuff. So unless you're going out and being proactive and learning on your own, you're not going to get it. And that, because even when I made that test 911 call from that hotel, I was down there at our state mandated training. Now they do great on certain things, but I was asking them in the class about RAY BAUM'S Act, Kari's Law, and all this stuff. No one knew. So I think a lot of it's just an educational thing. And then, so I think it is just an educational thing on the 911 industry side and for the public, because the public has no idea as well. They don't know that they shouldn't have to dial 911.
Or 99.
Right, or 99. And I can't remember which one of you all said it best, if it was you or Tracy or Hank. We don't teach our children to dial 911, and we shouldn't have to.
Yeah, I think we've all said that over the many, many webinars that we've had over the years. It's, Hank and I always say, listen, you look at any police car, fire truck, or ambulance, what are the numbers on the side? It's 911, not 911. Right. Unless you're in a hotel, then you might have to dial 9, or you might have to dial 85, or you have to dial 3678. I mean, Hank and I looked, we were traveling constantly, and you wouldn't believe the amount of pictures. I was going back through my Facebook pictures. I've got thousands of pictures of hotels that say dial 911 or dial some other number or call the operator. Good golly. I mean, that was one of the first things that woke me up to this. All right. Well, that wraps up the hour. We're actually a minute over. Thanks, everybody. The recording will be available. I will go through all the questions to make sure they're all answered and make sure the answers go out there to everyone. Thank you again, Irwin, Martha, and most of all, thank you, Shanna. We really appreciate public safety joining us on these, and also Tracy, who made the effort of being here even when she couldn't be here. This really helps address the problem that's out there. So with that, have a great day, and thanks again, everyone.